even a social media message if you're writing that. Now, while I'll be talking about writing in general, I think these principles apply most in our professional lives, because business writing is something which we often sort of don't take very seriously. We do it in a slightly cavalier manner. Sometimes we don't follow certain principles and rules, but you can elevate the quality of your writing simply by following a few techniques. And one such framework, which we talk about endlessly at Harappa, that's the one I'm going to talk about today. It's one of my favorite frameworks in the world, I have to say. And this is called the PAM framework. PAM is nothing but, a framework which says, how do you structure your writing, basically? And I'll give you a very simple example. All of us have applied for jobs. All of us have applied for various positions. And this is a very common question. An interviewer says, tell me about yourself. So how do you frame your answer? And I've taken this situation particularly thinking about the framework, because the meat of the framework lies in identifying various aspects of this interaction. So let's get into the details of PAM. The P in PAM is the purpose of your communication. Going back to the question I put on the screen, if the purpose of my communication is to persuade someone to hire me for a job, is to help me pivot in my career, I know exactly how I should be communicating and why. This is my why. So I will try to convey an information. I will try to make a case for myself as somebody who is suitable to a certain kind of role. I will try to influence. I will try to persuade, not so much entertain maybe to an interviewer for a job interview. But yes, you might also want to throw in a bit of light information about yourself. And in other situations, when you're talking to a client, when you're talking to your peers, when you're managing a team, it could be any number of situations. Then you want to sort of, use the other things like inquire, ask a question, give feedback to a team member, appreciate somebody's efforts that have gone into, creating a presentation or whatever it is. You might even want to send a thank you note to a friend who has helped you out. And so that's the purpose of your writing. And you can see that PAM is actually sort of applicable across many situations in life as well as work. The next thing that I think of is, who am I communicating with? So I know what I'm saying to what is the intent of my communication to my prospective job interviewer. And I know the audience. This is a person who is going to recruit me. So I have that knowledge at the back of my head. In other cases, you could think of, whoever your stakeholder is, whoever you're communicating with. And finally, I'm going to think about, what are the information they already have, what is their need, and how open are they to listening to me. In the case of a job interview, for instance, some of us have the tendency to come in and start with our CV. Now, that's really defeating the purpose, because your CV is already with your recruiter. They now want to know something which they haven't heard before from you, which is not part of your CV, a story, maybe a kind of summary or a story, or a little like a, almost like a photograph of you. Who are you as a person? That's the information they need. So when you're writing that extra cover letter or something, do not waste it on your CV directly. Try to sort of manufacture something else around it. And I'll show you how I do it when I give you my example. Their need. So their need is to be convinced that I'm the right candidate for this job, that I have enough expertise and enough experience to do this job well. And finally, how open are they to listening? Now, again, a job interviewer may be tired after listening to many, many people. So they may be slightly sort of tuned out. Your job is to spark that excitement by saying something interesting, something specific, something compelling, so that they sit up and listen to you. And finally, the last part of PAM, which is M, is the message that you're communicating. So what essentially are you saying? And again, in a message, you will want to convey your key idea. You will want your audience to take away some information, something that will bring in a call to action, something that will make them act on what you have said. So when you think of even the most basic communication in this kind of a pyramid, in this kind of a model rather, you see how it becomes easier to convey the most important facts about who you are and the essence of who you are. And I'll show you what I did with PAM. So when I tried to answer that question, tell me about yourself, I said that I'm a communications expert who helps others write, read, think, learn, and express themselves better, no matter the industry or the domain they work in. So the purpose of my message, if I'm presenting this to a job interviewer, I will try to immediately tell them that I am the right person for this. Listen to me. And they will listen to me. Why? Because I'm talking about my core skill and also saying that skill is transferable across industry or domain. It doesn't matter whether you're an engineer, whether you're an architect, whether you are a product manager, you will need to understand how to write and express yourself clearly in order to do your job well. Then I'm saying I have 15 plus years of experience as a journalist and publisher. That's how I'm sort of putting more gravitas into my introduction. And finally, I'm saying that I work with several Indian and international publications to produce stories that have reached a wide audience. So immediately I'm giving you my value proposition, that I'm valuable because I have this rich experience. I have reached out to a wide readership and I've created a kind of reputation for myself as a writer and editor. So this is a very, very handy transferable framework to keep in mind anytime you're trying to convince somebody to listen to you. I'll just go back to the original slide so that it stays in your mind while Seema and I might just have a chit chat and answer some of your questions probably before we move on.
Right. Thank you so much. I think PAM is really a very, very critical framework. And oftentimes, in the three things, Somak, purpose, audience, and message, while all three are important, when you sit down to actually write, what is the first one that you pick up, or which is the one that is most critical that helps the other two sort of develop?
I think knowing the purpose, it is kind of a hierarchy for me. Knowing the purpose is essential. Like, I do not want to bore somebody with something. For instance, if I came to this webinar unprepared and talked about something else, that would be defeating the purpose of this webinar. So the purpose is the first thing I keep in mind. And then the audience, which decides my, tone of communication, how I'm going to pitch it. If it's a senior leader, I'm going to write it in a certain way. If I'm writing to a peer, I'm writing in a slightly more informal tone. Maybe if I'm writing to a friend, then I'm writing completely informally. So I think I do follow that hierarchy. And finally, I get to the message. How am I constructing that message to actually have the maximum impact I want? And if I may go back to my previous avatars, I mean, this is how we also were trained to write in newspaper industries. We were asked to put the lead of a copy at the very beginning, which is the meat of the copy, the purpose of the news story, the headline that you see, and right after you see, 20 people got waterlogged because of severe rain in Delhi, buses stopped, public transport broke down, whatever it is, we give the meat of the copy at the beginning, and then we break it down into why this happened and how this happened and who does it apply to, basically.
Okay, let's pick a quick question. This comes from Jeevan Garg. Jeevan wants to know how to avoid conflicts and be impactful while writing skillfully. That's interesting. He wants everything. He wants to be impactful, he wants to be skillful, and he also wants to avoid conflicts. So simply, I think, let me just translate that question a little bit and ask you, if you have to write a tough message, which that could lead to a conflict, what are the 2 or 3 things that you will always keep in mind?
So again, if you think of PAM, you already know the purpose of this message, that it is a conflict situation, you want to mitigate it in some way, or you want to sort of, find a middle way or compromise or whatever it is you're looking for. I think tone is of the absolute importance. How you phrase your writing, whether you're using emotionally charged, language. And again, we have masterclasses on this at Harappa, and in business writing, AMP will also have this as a communication module where we talk in great detail about how to avoid certain pitfalls of communication, how to not say things in a way that offends people. Because honestly speaking, communication written on an email or a text message or a WhatsApp message is the hardest thing to decode, because you can't see the face of the person. And your job is to make your communication such that not only the message, but the warmth of your tone, the specific nuances of your personality also come through in that message. So I would say understanding your audience and the tone. And we also have a great framework, and I use it punningly, it's the GRT framework. Again, something we do in the communications module in more detail, which gives you the nuts and bolts of how to understand goal and the recipient and the tone of your message. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, answer to a very, very complex and wide-ranging question, which will take a whole session to answer if I did actually go into detail.
So Somak, when we sit down in an office or a corporate environment, what are the 2 or 3 pieces of communication that often become very, very critical and important? So, for example, we all must know how to write emails. We all must know how to deal with, the informal channel. Like, for example, we use Teams. Are there any rules that you follow for something like that?
Absolutely. I think there is a communication hygiene that needs to be followed on every platform that you're using to communicate. For me, Teams is more like an instant message. I wouldn't send important communication which might be missed on an instant messaging app, for instance. I mean, that's really one of the protocols. And of course, you have to follow a certain, protocol of politeness and approachability, all of that in your message. If you don't know the answer to something, I think it's best to admit that rather than, prolong it into a conflict. But with emails also, I find, people often write long paragraphs to convey information that is entirely counterproductive. Good communication is not about beautiful sentences. Good communication is about forming bridges between people. So if I can summarize my email in 3 bullet points, I would rather go for that approach and make my communication understood instantly. And we are living in an era where people have very little attention span. We are getting hundreds of emails every day. How many emails do we have the bandwidth to read carefully? So again, structurally, an email has to come with the most important message at the top. And for me, that's the subject line, which will immediately hook me. Otherwise, if I just get a hello email with the subject line, that's like, a generic email you can get at any time of the day, and you may not be compelled to look at it immediately. So crafting the subject line, and especially in a job environment, when you're applying for a job and you're trying to get somebody's attention, the right subject line, the right opening paragraph, because again, we were taught in journalism hands-on training that if your copy begins with a boring fact or it doesn't have an appealing hook at the beginning, then no one will read your story. And this is true for online journalism a lot. In digital journalism, in content, we see that happening a lot. People start reading something, they lose interest after 3 seconds, they drop off the copy. You don't want that to happen to your email, especially when you're trying to get recruited, or especially when you're trying to influence a stakeholder, maybe to, release funds or approve a project or anything.
Yeah, or it could just be catching the attention of your boss, or, sort of maybe it's a collaboration email where you need to get someone else, a teammate from some other team, to sort of respond to you. So as Somak said, if your subject line is not interesting enough for them to open it, oftentimes you'll find that your mail is, gets slipped, or they forget it, or it's put somewhere else. So even within the organization, when you're writing, even for work purposes, it's always a good idea to put a headline in such a way that it catches the attention of the other person and they are compelled to sort of respond to you. Right?
Absolutely. And I think email at the end of the day is very functional, and we have to keep it like that. It has to get value, like we are using email to communicate a certain message, and that has to come through clearly and in the shortest possible time. And especially those who are sending out customer emails, client emails and things like that, there the importance of grabbing attention becomes even more important, because your colleagues will still read an email. You can walk up to them or call them and ask them to look at it, but you can't always do that with customers. So if you are building a business, if you're working in a role which has customer facing responsibilities, you will need to know how to craft the right kind of email.
All right, the questions are coming in, but before I move on, I just wanted to know, and maybe you can just put this answer in chat. Somak also has another framework that he wants to share with you. But I was like, let's just first go with the question. So if you want him to share the other framework, it would be great if you just put a yes in the chat and we'll quickly pick it up. All right, let me take this question from Indra Mami Tiwari. And she says she's working as a freelance writer and looking to understand the nitty-gritty of writing. I think we've been answering a lot of those questions, but any one special tip for her, Somak?
So thank you for that question. I think, one thing that I can tell you as a freelance writer, and I can guess that you might have to pitch to a lot of people, right? And writing that pitch is very important for you. And pitch writing itself is a craft, like, again, editors are busy, people who farm out writing responsibilities are busy. You will have to put out the most important fact about yourself, about your gift of writing, why you are sort of a good writer and why they should hire you. Whether it's, you've written for X number of companies, you're deadline oriented, you're execution oriented, whatever it is, that becomes the purpose of your communication, to convey that very strongly. I think crafting a pitch is something you should very much think about closely and keep PAM in mind while you do so. Again, in a business scenario, we teach how to craft a pitch. And, of course, that's what we also do at Harappa and Harappa School of Leadership.
So I'll take this question from Surabhi. She's indicated where she works. It's apparently a military think tank. Very intrigued, Surabhi, and I wish we could find out a little bit more about what you exactly do. But Surabhi's question, and I'll pick that up, Somak, just give me a second. Surabhi says, there are times when I know the purpose, the idea that I would like to convey through my work to an audience. But after a point, I lose the why. And I feel short of words. I find it difficult to complete the sentence of the article. What do you do in a situation like this?
I think a purpose should actually be very short and precise. We shouldn't labor the purpose too much. If it's about starting a conversation, if it's about the beginning of a communication, I would say keep your purpose short and sweet. Just find the one why you want to address and just leave it at that. Of course, every communication has multiple whys, but in the hierarchy of those whys, which why comes the most important for you, comes out as the most important for you? I would start with that why and not labor it too much. I mean, I know it's a very kind of generic answer, but I hope that helps you understand and structure your whys in a certain useful way.
Okay, let's pick up this question, which is very interesting. We've got a scenario. This scenario comes from Shahana. I think that's how it's pronounced. She says, let's consider this scenario where I have to get an approval from my management. How to frame a structure with urgency and ask this. So I'm presuming that she wants to get some sort of approval and she wants to get it urgently. So how does she frame, or what she think about, how should she write so that, that she's able to get it?
So again, there are many writing frameworks that we use at Harappa. And to me, immediately what comes to mind is Aristotle appeals. Aristotle's appeals are basically, emotional, logos, ethos, pathos. These are the three parts of it. I won't go into great detail, but they are ways of triggering emotional response in your listener or, somebody who is reading your correspondence. Again, I would say, without going into great detail, if you look at PAM, if you put the purpose of your message at the top, say, you want an instant response, of course, urgent is the word that comes to mind. So you put urgent in the subject line, and there's a craft to it, like which part of it will actually evoke that response. I think if your business outcome is failing, if it's involving costs that you will incur if something is not approved quickly, if it involves not meeting a deadline, all the negatives that can arise out of such a situation, I would say if you put that on the top, that might get the attention fastest. That's just one way of going about it. I think if I know a more specific scenario, I will be able to give you a more nuanced answer. But to me, this is what comes to mind immediately.
All right. And for now, the questions have dried up. Last one. And meanwhile, everyone, as I said, please put your questions in the Q&A box and we are here to answer them. Let's take the last question that's in the Q&A box. This is Shahid Khan. informal communication creates its own multiplier effect vis-a-vis formal. How does one manage this in organizations?
So I'm not sure what you mean by multiplier effect here, but I assume that you're saying something about the pitfalls of informal communication, probably.
I suppose what Shahid is trying to say is sometimes when you become too formal in an organization or become too informal, each of them can have an impact. So how do you sort of, in an organization or when you're doing work-related communication, what is a better sort of way? Because all the time too formal or too stiff-necked also may not work, right?
Exactly. And that might, show you up as somebody who is very unapproachable or somebody who is always trying to keep a distance. And if you don't build warmth with your colleagues, it's very difficult to work in an organization together, especially as a team. So I would say, honestly speaking, I prefer email hygiene with a, greeting and a sign off, which we usually should follow in every email communication as far as possible. But sometimes I feel that there is merit in also responding quickly like an instant message and not labor into the formal architecture of the email. That's just the structural part of it. I think tonally, I would advise you to maintain a certain kind of polite, formal tone. That's always advisable in a default professional setting, because you can never go wrong with that. But you can actually go wrong with a lot of informal tone. You can obviously sort of, depending on your comfort level with your colleagues, with your peers, with your seniors, you can use a certain tone, but that's at your risk. So I think in order to just steer clear of any controversies or any misunderstandings, it's best to stick to a formal tone on email. And there's always chance to warm up and open up informally when you meet a person face to face, whether it's on a call or, whether you're sort of walking up to their desk and speaking to them. For that, we have speech. And there are, again, techniques and frameworks to how to make your presence felt in a kind of work professional setting that we talk about.
Okay, I think it's good time for you to pull out that little magic second framework and talk about that, Somak.
Sure. I'm just going to move ahead. Just give me a moment. So my next framework is actually called the 3 C's framework. And I think that will also answer some of the questions that were raised in this session. And I tried to very, very quickly, cursorily sort of, address them. 3 C's are nothing but these 3 C's. They are concise writing, clear writing, and compelling writing. And if you don't follow the 3 C's, your writing is going to get cluttered, complicated, and it will lose its audience. Whether you're writing a book, whether you're writing an article, whether you're writing an email, whether you're writing a message, it doesn't matter. You have to follow these 3 things to actually get your reader. Let me just go into this in a little detail. I think by clear, I mean using simple words and avoiding jargon. But again, this is a case-specific thing. If you're talking to a domain expert about, say, I don't know, product management or a SaaS product or something like that, the challenges of building something quite niche, then obviously you'll be using jargon because that person understands you and they're on the same page. But if you send out a communication to your consumers riddled with jargon, especially industry jargon, which people may not understand very clearly, financial jargon, legal jargon especially, then the purpose of your communication is lost. People will not be interested in your product. Using an active voice instead of a passive voice. Now, this is unfortunately an Indianism that I've seen very often, and it's a legacy of the British bureaucratic kind of style of writing, that this was done by them. This, you will never say, I did this, it was done by me. In this kind of a very formal, passive voice, stilted, bureaucratic English, bureaucratic kind of style of writing comes through as a legacy of the, colonial kind of legacy that we had. I think the more natural your voice is, the more I sentences you use, the more we sentences you use, that will make you more and more relatable to whoever is reading you. And that's why, if you just think of fiction, if you think of novels, Why do we read novels which have an I narrator with such interest? Because we almost feel that we know that character and they're talking to us exclusively. It builds that bridge immediately. So I think this is a very important factor in business communication, which we don't often keep in mind. And finally, use the right pace and pauses when you're writing. You cannot write very long sentences. People will start reading and then forget by the end of the sentence what they read at the beginning. So you can't have long-winded sentences. You have to have short, impactful sentences, which are, I would say 12 to 18 words long at the most. I mean, that's like the golden standard in any kind of journalistic news writing, which should also apply to any business writing, I feel. The second C is...
I think that's one thing I've noticed many people in the corporate sort of this thing don't seem to adhere to. It's all the time like they want to say everything in one sentence. I don't know where that comes from. It's okay to say the same thing in 3 sentences. It's just 3 extra or 2 extra full stops. There's no reason, to say and since and because and therefore, no need. So
Exactly. I think reduce the number of dependent clauses in a sentence. Just make it clear, one piece of information at a time. Don't club too many information. I think that's like something that I follow consciously when I write anything. And it relates to the second C, which is the concision part as well. Sometimes we add a lot of flab to our copy. We add unnecessary adjectives, adverbs, when we don't need all these things. I think the more concise your writing is, the more impact it will have. It will hold the attention span of your audience better. This is, again, relating back to the clear writing, short, precise sentences, 12 to 15 words. And remove words that do not add to a sentence. And I'll show this with an example, how something that comes to you can get better if you just put that editor's pen into it. Finally, to make it compelling, as I said, if you don't have an interesting hook to your email or whatever else it is you're writing, no one is going to read it. If the first chapter of a book I'm reading is utterly boring, what are the chances that I'll read 300 pages of it if the first 10 pages are putting me to sleep? In the same way, if an email is long, I see the size of the email and my eye pops out and I think, oh my God, who is going to read this? So A, it's not concise, and B, the beginning is probably not very appealing and I don't want to read it. But if you start with a hook, which is in a classic business situation is a storytelling approach to communication, or asking a provocative question if you're sending out a market communication, have you ever tried this product, or have you ever wanted to, I don't know, manage your time better or something like that, a hook which will actually get your audience's attention. Share a story with drama and suspense, especially when you're applying for a job. I think it's important to tell your recruiter the major challenges and the turning points of your life and what you've made of it. It could be your first job, it could be your second job, it could be a 10th job, but we all have crossed challenges in our life. And when we talk about them in a candid, authentic manner, it makes the communication so much more compelling. I immediately want to connect with that person. I see a face in front of me rather than just a string of words. And finally, bring out the passion, when you're connecting with your audience. Be genuine, be authentic. Don't hide and don't try to create a facade which is not you. It comes through very quickly. I think, people use now ChatGPT and all these things to generate content. And my answer to them is that ChatGPT can never write you into a communication. It can give you probably a skeleton of something, but it will never sound like who you are. And once you meet the real person in real life, when you go beyond the writing, they will see that you are not the person who sent me that email or wrote that piece to me. You don't sound like that person. So you have to sound like you in order to make yourself appealing to your audience. I'm quickly going to show you an example of a sentence that we'll then take the editor's pen to and sort of reduce it. I'm just going to read it out for those who may not be able to see the screen. This is a very kind of standard fare assembly line kind of response to a office problem, a professional problem. Somebody saying, when we drill down to it, this plan you've come up with doesn't seem like a magic bullet on move the needle. Let's circle back to the issue in a month for forward planning. This sort of thing, roughly this sort of thing we get to hear a lot in our professional lives. But do we really need to write in this style? Can we just apply the 3 C's, which is almost like a magic potion, and clean up these 2 sentences? And I've just done a round of edits on this sentence, and I've shown you when we drill down to it, this is unnecessary. You don't need to use this phrase. You can actually begin with this plan you've come up with. Magic bullet, move the needle. Magic bullet is nothing but to indicate a perfect solution. Move the needle is nothing but to say that have a big impact. Circle back is to re-examine a situation. Forward planning is, can you plan backwards? I mean, it's absurd to even say forward planning. Planning is always in the future. So why are we even using this phraseology? It's kind of a tautology to use this kind of phrase. So basically what we are doing is we are demystifying the jargon. There are these little jargon that we love to use, magic bullet, circle back, move the needle. Instead of that, we are using human language, the way I would speak to somebody in a real situation, in a real life context. And this is what the sentence basically is. Your plan doesn't solve the problem. Let's revisit the issue in a month and plan how to fix it.
You've completely removed the jargon and the drama from it. Is that allowed, Somak?
I think in this case, certainly, because the drama is not adding to a story effect. The drama is not saying if we don't solve this problem, we'll have a huge impact on our business. If that point was there somehow in the sentence, I would have kept it. But it has no additional value, nothing. So I've just pruned it and made it simple and precise. I feel there is more drama in these 2 very bare looking sentences than it was in the previous one, which was very cluttered. And just
but a lot of times we write the way this particular one is because it sounds like we have a better command on language. We are using phrases which are, move the needle and all that. Doesn't it sound more like grander than what you've done?
I think that's the thing. Like the more bombastic you make something sound, it doesn't make it more appealing. Actually, you can add exclamation marks. You can add whatever you want. You can, burden it with a lot of adjectives and a lot of, suspense and drama. But ultimately, I feel these 2 sentences, at their most pared down, understated version, is more dramatic than the previous one. There is a quiet dignity in this style. And also a call to action. Your plan doesn't solve the problem. How much more straightforward can you get? And this is like hitting the sort of nail with the hammer on the head, exactly like what you need to know. Let's revisit the issue in a month and plan how to fix it. Simple, clear, effective call to action.
You have a little compliment coming from Rajesh, who says, when you were talking about the active passive, he suddenly realizes that he's also using a lot of passive voice. So, Rajesh, we hope that you reread every sentence you write now. And it's actually just a matter of habit. You do this 3, 4, 5, 7 times, and you'll find that you automatically stop doing it. And there's something from Gaurav who wants to know, that you're saying be mindful of your reader's attention span. So basically, I think when we were talking about why we should write short, sharp sentences, I think the reason why that's important is for your reader's mind span, right?
Absolutely. You don't want to lose your reader. That's what I meant, that if you don't see, we are also sent a lot of communication every day. How much of it do we read ourselves? Primarily because we are not interested, we are bored, we are tired, our attention span is flagging. People want to look at social media rather than a book. So that's what I meant, that you have to write in such a way that the reader has no choice but to read you.
All right, one more question quickly from Gaurav, who wants to know, do you recommend using metaphors or analogy?
I think they have their place, of course. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using those things. Sometimes to enhance the drama of a situation, you will need to use a metaphor or an analogy. We will sink like the Titanic if we don't do something. And that's to kind of really exaggerate the effect and get quick action. But if you overuse drama and metaphor, that's no use, because it just becomes par for the course and no one will take you seriously. So I think the more sparingly you use these in business communication, the more impactful drama and metaphor becomes.
Guys, please put your questions in the Q&A box. It's very difficult to keep track of the chat. Very quickly, I think somebody called Karthik is saying hi to you. I don't know if you know him, but let me just pick up the questions in chat. This is from Siddhi. I think it's a she. Says that she's a digital content writer. Lately, I write a lot of content around how-to questions. For example, how to pair your earbuds. Generally, the answer to these questions is quite short. Certainly not large enough to write a 1,000-word article. In such cases, what is the best way to make up the word count? Are you a freelance writer, Siddhi? Because that will tell Somak and me how to answer this question.
But I do have a point of view on that, because Siddhi is saying that, freelance writer, but I do have a point, because, honestly, sometimes when you read instruction manuals, even on a tech product, they're very cryptic. The C-type cable, I don't know what a C-type cable is. I may not know that. We don't think of the widest audience when we give out these instruction manuals. So I feel that there is a case to be made to gently explain something out a little more than constantly be very cryptic. So again, based on your discretion, you have to use it. Sometimes you shouldn't and cannot stretch something like an elastic. It will just snap if you keep extending your copy, and your employers will not like it. So for your own good, you shouldn't do that. But I think it's good to be mindful of that fact too, that sometimes we do need to explain stuff in slightly more detail than we do.
And I think I'll just add here, Siddhi, a lot of times it's also dependent on what your editor or what the publication, what is the format or the style they use. If their style expects you to write in short sentences and other things, then there is really nothing much you can do about it. And as an editor, I can tell you that many times, even if it was really a great copy, whatever, the point is that there is a certain space or there is a certain allowance that we have. We can't go beyond that. So there is a constraint on both sides. Okay, Rajiv wants to know, does using I, active voice, instead of me, passive voice, sounds egoistic sometimes?
It could sound very pompous sometimes. The moment you go into passive voice, you're almost this sort of distant entity who is speaking like a god, like the Queen of England says, we will not do this. It's like something very grand and distancing. Whereas the active voice immediately bridges that distance. When I say, I love writing, I don't say writing is loved by me. It sounds very pompous and convoluted when you put that me construction in it. And I helps you bridge that gap and makes you more endearing, I think, as a communicator.
All right, and here's a question again from Shahana. In a meeting setup where multiple people are willing to be involved, how to subtly communicate and ask for your needs clearly?
This is more of a verbal communication situation. I don't think we can apply the writing communication frameworks very directly. Of course, some of it still applies, but this is more like a presence verbal communication situation, and it is a far more nuanced answer that I can possibly give very quickly. But I feel there is always scope to not interrupt, but save your questions for later and ask to be heard, basically, by whoever is conducting the meeting. Anyone who conducts a meeting well will, of course, open it out for questions and comments. So I feel that there is always that chance to ask your question. But again, I cannot give you a very in-depth answer because of time constraints, and this is really not a strictly writing-related answer.
All right. I think we're almost on time. If there's any other question, there's a question from Karthik. Very last question. How to internalize the learnings one grasps from reading books or any other resources? Because at times we know the correct structure of sentences, but when it comes to execution or writing it ourselves, we falter. How to tackle that?
So I would say two things to this. Read as much as you can every day. I think if you make reading a habit every day, things get internalized like a sponge. You sometimes won't even realize that you're using a phrase or a word that you read and learned in some book. Secondly, when you read, please read mindfully and make a mind map when you're reading. Make notes, make jottings, underline sentences, keep stock of all the interesting phrases and words that you get while in the course of reading. And it sounds like, a chore, like a punishment, but it's not. I think it's genuinely nice to be able to learn new ways of speaking, new ways of communication. But it's, again, at the end of the day, it's like, how you learn to ride a bicycle. The more you do it, the more balance you find and the more seamless it becomes. You see a master pianist playing a concerto or a sonata. They are not looking at every key and pressing it. They are actually practiced so much that they know it inside out. So writing is a bit like that. The more you read and the more you write, I would say, writing a journal or whatever it is you do every day at a fixed time on a regular basis, even if it's 1 page, half a page, 3 sentences, if you write every day, it becomes second nature and habit, really.
So I think that answers your question as well, Sanjay. Thank you so much. You've been putting small questions. I think you were asking us how to learn small tips. I think Somak's already given you some ideas. Write something that you like somewhere. Maybe write a journal regularly. That will help you to improve your writing. Read a lot more, because reading is the one thing that improves your writing. And I think we don't pay enough emphasis on that, but reading regularly also improves the way you structure your own communication. So I think that those are the 3 sort of things that we look forward to leaving
I'm
with.
not just reading the internet, but reading real books and articles, I would say.
We've got a digital writer here. She's not going to be too happy with that. Anyway, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us. By the way, we are part of the Harappa School of Leadership, and we run an accelerated management program where leadership is one of the largest sort of tracks that we have. And in that, communication and how to communicate at work is one of the most important things that we teach you. If you're interested, I've already put in a lot of information on how you can reach out to us. Please do connect if this is a program that interests you. And once again, thank you so much, Somak. This was really interesting. I'm so glad we left them, everybody, with 2 frameworks that they could use. Let's see if they will be able to sort of, use and apply them, and do let us know how it worked out. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining.